Blood is not a safe haven. It is a cold knife hidden up a sleeve. When a crimson cocktail ruined my custom silk vest on my 32nd birthday, I assumed it was just a spoiled teenager acting out. I was wrong. That red stain was the opening shot in a web of monstrous lies, forcing me to tear off my sister's perfect mask and reclaim my life. Brace yourself. This story has no room for soft forgiveness. Welcome to Maya Revenge Stories. And please allow me to share that since YouTube has completely disabled our monetization, we currently have zero budget to keep this channel alive. If you find today's story compelling, please consider supporting us with just $1 so we can pay our dedicated team to survive and continue creating these narratives for you. You can easily help us by scanning the QR code on your screen or by clicking the donation link provided in the description and the pinned comments. My name is Joanna Lawson, and on the evening of my 32nd birthday, the fragile illusion of my family finally shattered. Altitude 360 was supposed to be the pinnacle of dining in Denver. It was an exclusive restaurant wrapped in floor-to-ceiling glass, offering breathtaking views of the city lights and a suffocatingly arrogant atmosphere. It was exactly the kind of place my sister insisted we go to, not to celebrate me, but to be seen by the right people. But that evening, the high altitude and the astronomical prices became nothing more than the backdrop for the moment my patience permanently died. I stood frozen at the head of the heavy oak table. The expensive ice cubes clinked softly as they scattered across the polished floor tiles, an obnoxiously cheerful sound that mocked the dead silence in our private dining section. A jagged, violently spreading stain of a crimson pomegranate cocktail was currently soaking into the fabric of my custom white silk vest. I had flown to Milan a month prior and had this piece tailored specifically to celebrate the professional milestones I had achieved this year. Now, the cold, sticky liquid was seeping through the luxurious silk, pressing against my skin like an icy, unforgiving hand. The glass had not slipped. It was not a clumsy mistake made by a distracted waitress. The drink had been hurled directly at my chest by Madison, my 15-year-old niece. She sat slumped in her oversized leather chair, her mobile phone loosely gripped in her left hand, while her right arm remained hovering in the air from the sheer force of the throw. I stared at her, expecting a gasp of horror or a rushed apology. Instead, Madison did not look apologetic in the slightest. Her lips slowly curled upward into a cruel, deeply satisfied smirk. It was a flawless, chilling mirror image of the expression her mother wore every time she tore someone down. I slowly shifted my gaze to Harper, my older sister and Madison's mother. Any rational parent would have instantly reprimanded a 15-year-old for committing such an aggressive and humiliating act in a public setting, but Harper simply leaned back in her chair, lifting her crystal glass to take a deliberately slow sip of her vintage wine. A quiet, breathy chuckle escaped her throat, slicing through the tension like a razor. "Oh, calm down, Joanna," Harper drawled, waving a perfectly manicured hand dismissively in the air. "It was obviously just a little accident. You always have to make such a huge, dramatic scene out of absolutely nothing just to get all the attention on yourself. It is just a piece of fabric. I will buy you a cheap replacement from the mall tomorrow so you can stop pouting." Her words hung in the air, heavy, venomous, and entirely expected. I turned my eyes to the two people who were fundamentally supposed to protect me, my parents, Richard and Eleanor. They sat rigidly on the opposite side of the table. Neither of them spoke a single word of defense on my behalf. My father suddenly found his empty water glass incredibly fascinating, tracing the rim with his thumb. My mother nervously adjusted her pearl necklace, her eyes darting everywhere except in my direction, actively avoiding my gaze. Their silence was not new. It was a deeply ingrained, decades-old tradition. It was the suffocating, heavy blanket they always threw over my feelings to protect their absolute golden child. Harper could burn my house to the ground, and my parents would simply ask me why I had carelessly left matches in her line of sight. In that suffocating silence, the familiar, agonizing tightness gripped my throat. For 32 years, this was the exact script of my life. I was supposed to bite my lip, lower my head, excuse myself to the restroom to silently cry, and then return with a forced smile to apologize for ruining the celebratory mood. I was the perpetual punching bag, the designated absorber of their toxic energy. But tonight, as the sticky red syrup clung to my chest, something vital inside my mind snapped completely. A cold, sharp, and brilliantly clear wave washed over my brain, instantly extinguishing the lifelong habit of submission. I did not cry. I did not let my lower lip tremble. I did not storm off in a theatrical display of grief for them to laugh at. Slowly, with absolute, terrifying precision, I reached into my designer clutch and pulled out my premium credit card. I calculated my exact share of the appetizers we had eaten and the single glass of sparkling water I had managed to order. I placed the card on the silver payment tray in the center of the table, laying down a crisp $50 bill next to it for the waiter. I stood up straight, towering over them. I looked directly at Madison's triumphant smirk, then at Harper's arrogant, condescending glare, and finally at the cowardly, downcast faces of my parents. I did not utter a single word of anger. I did not give them the satisfaction of a reaction. I just swept my eyes over the four of them, delivering a look so devoid of warmth, so entirely dead, that I actually saw my mother physically shiver. I turned on my heel and walked out of the restaurant. My posture was perfectly straight, my footsteps echoing with absolute finality, leaving them to drown in the awkward silence I flatly refused to fill. The town car ride back to my apartment was entirely silent. I sat alone in the spacious back seat, watching the glittering Denver skyline blur past the tinted windows. The city looked beautiful, but my focus remained strictly inward. I looked down at the ruined silk on my chest. The crimson stain looked exactly like a fatal, bleeding wound. But I was not bleeding. For the first time in my entire existence, I was truly healing. By the time the heavy vehicle pulled up to the entrance of my building, my decision was absolute and cemented in stone. The compliant, desperate for love Joanna died on the floor of Altitude 360. I would never again play the role of the inferior, pathetic understudy in their deeply toxic family theater for another second. Harper and her daughter thought they had just ruined my birthday outfit. They had no idea they had just declared a war they could never possibly win. The morning sun cut sharply across the sleek glass facade of Vanguard Horizon Dynamics, casting long geometric shadows across the pavement. I walked through the automated sliding doors precisely at 8 o'clock in the morning. The heavy tempered glass sealing out the chaotic noise of the Denver streets behind me. My attire had fundamentally shifted from the ruined, delicate silk of yesterday to a charcoal gray, double-breasted power suit paired with a crisp black blouse and razor-sharp stilettos. It was not just corporate attire, it was structural armor. Today, I officially assumed my new title as project director, stepping into a corner office on the 42nd floor to oversee a technology portfolio worth tens of millions of dollars. As I settled into the high-backed leather chair, the panoramic view of the jagged mountains served as a stark reminder of the altitude I had reached entirely through my own relentless grit. My personal mobile phone vibrated violently against the mahogany desk, shattering the quiet focus of the room. The screen flashed aggressively with 17 missed calls and 12 voicemails. Every single one was from my parents. The text message previews marching across my lock screen were painfully predictable. They were furiously demanding that I call Harper immediately and apologize for storming out of the restaurant and displaying such an aggressively disrespectful attitude. They accused me of ruining a beautiful family gathering with my typical selfish theatrics. I stared at the flashing screen, but I did not feel a single, microscopic pang of guilt. I calmly picked up the device, navigated directly to the contact settings, and permanently blocked both of their numbers. A total, uncompromising communication blackout was now in effect. The boundary was finally drawn, thick, heavy, and completely impenetrable. With the toxic, emotional noise silenced, I turned my absolute attention to the dual high-definition monitors illuminating my desk. I needed to log into a legacy development database using an old university email address I rarely checked anymore. As the cluttered inbox slowly populated with years of spam, a bright red notification banner caught my immediate attention. It was a high-priority automated alert from a major national credit bureau, sent to this backup email precisely at 2:15 in the morning. The subject line read, "Urgent notice regarding your recent loan application." My brow furrowed in genuine confusion. I had not applied for any loan whatsoever. I owned my downtown apartment outright and maintained zero consumer debt. I clicked the secure link, verifying my identity through the multi-factor authentication portal. The page loaded slowly, eventually displaying a comprehensive multi-page credit report that made the breath physically catch in my throat. My historically pristine financial profile was violently scarred by a chaotic, parasitic web of active, high-balance accounts I had never authorized. The polished corporate director vanished in a fraction of a second, replaced entirely by the cold, calculating, and surgically precise mindset of a systems engineer. I immediately began pulling raw data, cross-referencing origin IP addresses, and relentlessly tracing the digital transaction histories. The deeper I excavated the data, the more horrifying the architecture of the fraud became. It was not a random, faceless hacker sitting in a dark basement halfway across the globe. The mailing addresses tied to the fraudulent accounts were subtly altered, cleverly disguised variations of my own name, redirecting the physical banking statements to a private post office box located just 3 miles from Harper's lavish suburban mansion. For the past 5 years, someone had been methodically and mercilessly mining my legal identity. The report detailed 5 maxed-out premium credit cards, 2 massive personal loans totaling over $65,000, and a humiliating chain of defaulted retail accounts. The itemized purchases were sickeningly specific and familiar: high-end medical spa treatments, luxury vehicle lease-down payments, and exorbitant receipts from elite designer boutiques. The financial parasite feeding on my flawless credit score was my own flesh and blood. Harper had maliciously leveraged my social security number, which she likely memorized from an old tax document my parents carelessly left out on the kitchen counter years ago, to secretly fund her superficial, aggressively lavish lifestyle. The sheer magnitude of the betrayal was a heavy, physical weight pressing down on my chest, but my analytical brain refused to stall, aggressively hunting for the final, missing piece of the puzzle. I suddenly remembered an antiquated shared family cloud storage account we used to upload vacation photographs almost a decade ago. I had not logged into that specific server in years. But if Harper was arrogant and careless enough to use a local post office box for federal fraud, she might be equally careless with her digital footprint. I swiftly bypassed the outdated security questions and accessed the synced devices directory. My instincts were flawless. Harper had never unlinked her old, discarded tablet from the family cloud network. I opened the message archive, typed my own name into the search bar, and hit enter. The results populated instantly, and the second brutal truth of the morning hit me like a heavy, open-handed slap across the face. It was an active text thread between Harper and Madison, time-stamped just 3 hours before my birthday dinner at Altitude 360. "Remember the plan," Harper had written, the digital text dripping with malice. "Make sure you trip and spill something dark and sticky right on that obnoxious white outfit she is so incredibly proud of. If you completely ruin it before the expensive appetizers even arrive, I will buy you that limited edition designer bag you have been begging for." Madison had replied less than a minute later with a laughing emoji. "Consider it done. She is going to cry so hard." The Crimson Cocktail was never an accident. It was a hired, premeditated hit. It was a calculated, theatrical humiliation orchestrated by my sister and gleefully executed by her teenage daughter, all for the pathetic price of a leather handbag. The deep, agonizing hurt that had lived inside my chest for 32 years instantly froze solid. It crystallized into something entirely different, something hard and diamond-sharp. The initial shock evaporated into the air, leaving behind a pure, unadulterated, and terrifyingly calm rage. Harper had not just stolen my financial security. She had actively weaponized her own child to destroy my dignity for pure entertainment. I slowly closed the laptop, the dark screen reflecting the face of a woman who had completely and permanently shed her lifelong victimhood. I was going to construct a counterattack so flawless, so mathematically devastating, that Harper would not even see the concrete ground rushing up to meet her until it shattered every single bone in her fraudulent, parasitic life. There would be absolutely no room for mercy. To catch a predator, one must first learn how to perfectly mimic the prey. I sat in the silent, temperature-controlled environment of my new corner office, holding my mobile phone. I had to suppress a wave of physical nausea as I navigated to my blocked contacts list and reinstated my parents and my sister, taking a deep, stabilizing breath. I carefully typed out a text message designed to sound exactly like the pathetic, desperate for approval Joanna they had terrorized for over 3 decades. "I am so incredibly sorry about my erratic behavior at dinner," I wrote, forcing the words through my fingertips. "I completely overreacted, and you were absolutely right. I was just stressed about work. To make it up to you, I would love nothing more than for the entire family to attend Vanguard Horizon Dynamics' annual charity gala this Saturday evening. You will be my exclusive VIP guests." I pressed send. I did not even have time to set the phone down before the screen illuminated with a reply from Harper. She had taken the bait with the predictable, greedy speed of a starving animal. "Apology accepted," her message read. "It is about time you realized how ridiculous and dramatic you were being. We will be there. Oh, and you should definitely make sure to introduce Greg to your wealthy corporate friends. He is just days away from closing a massive $5 million commercial real estate deal. He could probably give your little tech company some serious investment pointers." A cold, razor-thin smile spread across my face. She was so blinded by her own bloated ego that she could not see the steel jaws of the trap snapping shut around her ankles. While Harper spent her days eagerly shopping for a new designer gown for the gala, I retreated into the shadows to construct a concrete legal vault meant to bury her alive. I discreetly reached out to Arthur Vance, a notoriously ruthless white-collar criminal defense attorney, and partnered him with an elite, retired federal forensic accountant. We convened in a secure, windowless conference room on the far side of the city. I handed over the corrupted credit reports, the IP address logs, and the shared cloud confessions. We did not merely build a case. We constructed an inescapable, airtight fortress of empirical evidence. Every single fraudulent signature, every hidden digital transfer, and every forged loan application was systematically documented, legally notarized, and fully prepared for federal prosecution. The investigator tracked the stolen funds directly to Harper's secret accounts. It was a flawless, irrefutable chain of custody. However, Harper's arrogant text message regarding Greg's supposed $5 million commercial deal kept echoing in my analytical mind. In my experience, financial fraud rarely existed in a vacuum. It was highly contagious, often functioning as a toxic family business. I directed my investigative team to shift their focus and subtly probe into the private equity firm Greg claimed to manage. The results they uncovered 48 hours later were not just shocking. They were a horrifying masterclass in absolute financial depravity. Greg was not developing commercial real estate. There were no buildings. There were no construction permits. He was orchestrating a textbook, highly volatile Ponzi scheme. He was aggressively soliciting new investor capital merely to pay fake, inflated dividends to his early investors, illegally skimming massive management fees off the top to fund the lavish, superficial lifestyle he and Harper paraded around town. But the most sickening, agonizing twist of the investigation was discovering the identity of his primary anchor investors. It was my own parents. Richard and Eleanor had completely liquidated their conservative retirement portfolios. Worse, they had secretly taken out a massive second mortgage on their 4-bedroom suburban home, pouring every single penny of their life savings into their golden son-in-law's phantom projects. They were utterly blind to the fact that they were directly funding the very luxury that Harper used to constantly mock and belittle me. They were standing on a financial trapdoor, and Greg held the lever. Knowledge is a dangerous weapon, but leverage is absolute, unchecked control. Leveraging my formidable new position and salary at Vanguard Horizon Dynamics, I tapped into a vast, shadow network of distressed asset investors. I utilized a highly discreet, offshore shell company as a proxy to remain completely anonymous, moving with aggressive, predatory speed. I directed the fund to systematically buy up all of Greg's defaulting commercial loans and outstanding collateral debts. The regional banks were absolutely thrilled to offload his high-risk liabilities for pennies on the dollar. Within exactly 3 days, the power dynamic shifted entirely. I was no longer just the silent victim of identity theft. I was now the primary legal lien holder on every single asset Greg and Harper falsely claimed to own. I held the absolute power of financial life and death over their rotting, fraudulent empire. If I decided to call in those debts, their entire world would instantly collapse into a pile of worthless dust. The snare was pulled tight, but I needed to sever the final, delicate cord holding their toxic alliance together before the gala. I needed an inside operative, an agent of chaos. Harper had maliciously weaponized Madison against me at the restaurant, so it was only poetic justice that I returned the favor in kind. Madison was a spoiled, entitled teenager, but she possessed a sharp, self-serving intelligence. I meticulously compiled a separate, highly detailed dossier of bank statements from Harper's private accounts. The highlighted columns clearly demonstrated that the massive, untraceable cash withdrawals funding Harper's designer wardrobe and frequent luxury spa vacations were being siphoned directly from Madison's University Trust Fund. The educational account, which was supposed to secure her academic future, was currently 95% depleted. I placed the heavily redacted financial documents into an elegant, matte black gift box. I tied it with a thick silver ribbon and arranged for it to be delivered via an anonymous, bonded courier directly to the front office of Madison's private high school. I deliberately did not include a note. The devastating numbers spoke for themselves. The seed of absolute, irreversible betrayal was now planted right inside their own home. Ticking quietly in the dark, like a hidden explosive device, the board was perfectly set. The pieces were locked into their inevitable positions. The stage for the charity gala was fully illuminated, and the arrogant actors were blindly, eagerly walking right onto the execution block. The grand ballroom of the Beaumont Hotel was a sprawling cathedral of modern wealth. It was Saturday evening, precisely 8 o'clock, and the Vanguard Horizon Dynamics annual charity gala was in full swing. The ceiling was adorned with cascading crystal chandeliers that fractured the ambient light into a million glittering shards. Waiters in immaculate black ties glided silently across the imported marble floors, balancing silver trays loaded with glasses of vintage champagne and delicate caviar hors d'oeuvres. It was an atmosphere built on absolute perfection, which made it the ideal slaughterhouse. I stood near the entrance, enveloped in a tailored, midnight blue evening gown, nursing a glass of sparkling water. I watched the heavy, gold-plated doors swing open. Harper made her grand entrance. She was not merely arriving, she was aggressively invading the space. She wore a violently bright emerald green sequined dress that practically screamed for attention, clinging tightly to her figure. Greg strutted beside her, adjusting the cuffs of his rented tuxedo, while Madison trailed a few steps behind, dragging her feet with an expression of pure, unadulterated venom. "Oh, darling, is this really the best venue your little tech company could afford?" Harper's voice boomed across the reception area, deliberately loud enough to turn the heads of 2 senior board members standing near me. She leaned in for a fake, air-kiss embrace, the cloying scent of her heavy designer perfume assaulting my senses. "It is a bit cramped. Do you not think, and look at you, wearing such a dark, depressing color. You really need to let me take you shopping. You are supposed to be a director now, not a funeral parlor assistant." Normally, those words would have been the exact trigger to shrink my posture. Tonight, they sounded like the desperate squeaks of a mouse caught in a glue trap. I offered her a brilliant, incredibly warm smile. I am so glad you could make it. Harper, I replied, my voice smooth and utterly devoid of sarcasm. And Greg, you look incredibly sharp. In fact, there are some very influential people here tonight I have been dying to introduce you to. Greg's eyes lit up with the naked, insatiable greed of a degenerate gambler. He puffed out his chest, aggressively smoothing down his lapels. I gently guided him toward the center of the room, directly toward a small circle of 3 distinguished silver-haired gentlemen holding Scotch glasses. Greg, I would like you to meet Arthur, Thomas, and David, I said, making the introductions with a sweeping gesture. They manage a highly exclusive private wealth syndicate holding over $50 million in liquid capital. I mentioned your upcoming commercial real estate projects, and they were incredibly fascinated by your aggressive growth models. I did not mention that Arthur, Thomas, and David were, in reality, senior undercover agents from the Federal Financial Crimes Division, fully briefed and actively wired to record every single word. Greg practically shoved his way into their circle. Within exactly 2 minutes, he was loudly bragging about guaranteed 25% annual returns, completely risk-free investments, and his brilliant strategy of bypassing standard regulatory oversight. The federal agents nodded politely, asking incredibly specific, legally damning questions that Greg eagerly, arrogantly answered, handing them a neatly wrapped verbal confession to wire fraud and racketeering. While Greg enthusiastically dug his own federal grave, I drifted back toward the grand buffet tables. Harper was aggressively hissing at Madison, trying to force the teenager to stand up straight and mingle with the children of the executives. Madison, however, was having absolutely none of it. She was leaning heavily against a marble pillar, her arms crossed tight, glaring daggers at her mother. "Stop slouching, Madison," Harper snapped through a tight, fake smile, noticing my approach. "You are embarrassing me. Go over there and be polite." Madison let out a loud, harsh bark of a laugh that drew stares from an adjacent table. "Why should I bother being polite to anyone here? Are you trying to find a wealthy sugar daddy to adopt me? Mom, because we both know you certainly cannot afford my tuition anymore." Harper's face drained of color, a sickly pale white washing over her heavily contoured cheeks. "Keep your voice down," she hissed, her eyes darting nervously around the room. "I have absolutely no idea what you are talking about. You are just being an ungrateful, dramatic brat." "Oh, I am the dramatic one," Madison sneered, stepping aggressively into her mother's personal space. "Did you buy that hideous green dress with the $30,000 missing from my university trust fund? Or was that money used for your little spa trip to Aspen last month? Do not worry, Mom. I am sure I can just get a job flipping burgers to pay for my entire college education while you parade around in sequins." Harper physically recoiled, genuine panic flashing in her eyes for the first time in her entire life. She opened her mouth to argue, but no words came out. The absolute foundation of her perfect maternal image was cracking violently in public. Across the expansive room, utterly oblivious to the quiet implosion of their daughter and granddaughter, my parents were holding court by the ice sculpture. Richard and Eleanor had cornered the chief financial officer of Vanguard Horizon Dynamics. I stood just close enough to hear every tragic, delusional word. "Yes, our son-in-law is an absolute financial genius," my father boasted loudly, swirling his expensive cognac. "We completely trust him. In fact, Eleanor and I just pulled $250,000 out of our primary home equity to back his latest venture. We put every single penny we have into his firm just last Tuesday. You really have to strike while the iron is hot. We are practically securing a massive generational fortune as we speak." It was a horrific, sickening display of blind loyalty. They were proudly bragging about jumping off a financial cliff, completely unaware that there was absolutely no safety net waiting at the bottom. As the heavy grandfather clock in the foyer chimed 9 times, the evening reached its scheduled inflection point. It was time for the keynote charity address. Harper, desperately trying to escape Madison's relentless, venomous glaring, saw her opportunity to reclaim the spotlight. Without waiting for the event coordinator, She arrogantly marched right up onto the main stage, grabbing the polished silver microphone from the stand. The room slowly quieted down as the guests turned their attention toward the violently green dress. "Good evening, everyone," Harper announced, her voice dripping with artificial sweetness. "As the older, much wiser sister of your new project director, I just want to say how incredibly proud our family is tonight. We have always supported her, even when she was struggling to find her path. And to prove just how committed our family is to this beautiful charity, I am going to publicly challenge my little sister right now to personally match our family's upcoming donation with a check for $50,000. Come on, sweetie. Show all your wealthy new friends how generous you can truly be." She raised her champagne glass high into the air, a triumphant, malicious smirk plastered perfectly across her face. She thought she had brilliantly backed me into a corner, forcing me to either bankrupt myself publicly or look like a cheap, ungrateful executive in front of my entire corporate board. She held that arrogant pose for exactly 5 seconds. Then, with a deafening, heavy mechanical click, the massive ballroom was plunged into total darkness. The soft classical music instantly died. The microphone in Harper's hand emitted a harsh, high-pitched squeal of static before going completely dead. Gasps echoed through the pitch-black room. A moment later, a single, blindingly bright, high-intensity spotlight snapped on. It did not illuminate Harper. It hit the secondary podium positioned on the far left side of the massive stage. I stood there, bathed in the severe, unforgiving white light. My posture was perfectly straight. My expression was an unbreakable mask of cold, absolute resolve. I looked out into the sea of confused faces, my eyes locking directly onto Harper's terrified, shadowed silhouette. The ticking clock had officially run out. It was time for the absolute destruction to begin. The massive 40-foot LED screen behind the main stage suddenly surged to life with a blinding, high-definition hum. It was not the heartwarming Vanguard Horizon Dynamics charity promotional video the audience had been expecting. Instead, the display was flooded with a terrifyingly clear, massively magnified collage of classified financial documents. Side by side, in razor-sharp resolution, were the forged credit card applications, the falsified loan origination forms, and the itemized, $65,000 debt statements bearing my stolen Social Security number. Right next to my ruined credit profile, an even larger document materialized. It was the heavily redacted bank wire transfer logs, proving definitively that the $250,000 my parents had desperately pulled from their home equity had bypassed any commercial real estate escrow entirely. The funds had been aggressively funneled directly into a labyrinth of offshore shell accounts, registered under Harper and Greg's personal names. Every single illegal transaction, every forged signature, and every devastating piece of evidence was projected 50 feet high for the wealthiest, most influential citizens of Denver to scrutinize. The grand ballroom of the Beaumont Hotel plunged into a suffocating, graveyard silence. The collective breathing of 400 elite guests seemed to stop simultaneously. You could hear the faint, hollow clinking of a single dropped champagne flute hitting the imported marble floor. "Turn it off!" Harper shrieked, her voice shattering the quiet like jagged glass. She wildly waved her arms at the ceiling, her violently green sequined dress flashing frantically under the projector's glare. "Security, turn this garbage off immediately. It is a fake. It is a pathetic, jealous lie." She scrambled toward the edge of the stage, her high heels slipping dangerously on the polished mahogany. Greg, however, did not yell. He had instantly recognized the horrific, inescapable truth illuminating the room. His face turned the color of wet ash. He spun around, violently shoving past a waiter, desperately sprinting toward the heavy emergency exit doors near the kitchen. He did not even make it 10 feet. The 3 distinguished silver-haired investors I had graciously introduced him to earlier smoothly stepped into his path. Arthur, Thomas, and David dropped their expensive Scotch glasses onto the nearest table, with practiced, terrifying efficiency. They withdrew heavy gold federal badges from their tuxedo jackets. Thomas grabbed Greg by the shoulder, spinning him around and slamming him face first against the heavy oak paneling of the ballroom wall. The sharp, metallic ratcheting sound of heavy steel handcuffs locking around Greg's wrists echoed loudly across the silent room. "Gregory Sterling, you are under arrest for federal wire fraud, aggravated identity theft, and the operation of an unlicensed financial syndicate," Thomas announced, his voice booming with absolute chilling authority. "Do not move, and do not say another word." Harper froze mid-stride, staring in absolute, uncomprehending horror as her husband was violently restrained and read his Miranda rights in the middle of the Vanguard Horizon Dynamics charity gala. I raised my own silver microphone to my lips. My audio feed had never been cut. It was piped directly into the premium surround sound system of the ballroom, ensuring my voice would be the only thing anyone heard. "My sister just challenged me to prove my value to this esteemed audience," I stated, my voice echoing with a cold metallic resonance that commanded absolute obedience from the crowd. "I believe I just have. The documents illuminating this room are not fakes. They are certified, legally binding federal evidence. For 5 years, Harper Sterling has systematically committed felony identity theft against me, funding her designer wardrobe with my stolen credit. Simultaneously, her husband constructed a predatory Ponzi scheme to violently drain the retirement accounts of their own trusting family members." A collective gasp rippled through the sea of tuxedos and evening gowns. I stepped down from the secondary podium, my midnight blue dress flowing smoothly behind me as I walked directly toward the center of the room. The crowd physically parted for me, stepping back as if I were carrying a loaded weapon. But there is a very crucial detail Harper failed to realize while she was laughing at my ruined clothes, I continued, stopping exactly 5 feet away from my sister. "I did not just investigate you. Harper, I systematically dismantled you. Last Wednesday, an anonymous private equity fund aggressively purchased every single defaulting commercial loan, every maxed out line of credit, and every single toxic asset attached to your fraudulent name. I own that fund. I am now your largest and your only legally recognized creditor. I own your house. I own your cars. I own the absolute ruin of your pathetic life. Tomorrow morning, my attorneys will officially file maximum criminal charges against you for aggravated identity theft." "No!" Harper choked out, her legs finally giving way. She collapsed onto her knees on the hard marble floor, the emerald sequins scraping against the stone. The arrogant, untouchable golden child was entirely gone, replaced by a hyperventilating, pathetic shell. She crawled toward the center table where our parents were standing. "Mom, Dad, please, you have to tell her to stop. You have to save us. It is all a misunderstanding. Greg made me do it." Richard and Eleanor did not reach down to help her up. My father was clutching the edge of the linen-covered table, his knuckles completely white, his chest heaving as he stared at the massive screen projecting the exact serial numbers of his liquidated retirement accounts. He looked 20 years older, a broken, defeated man who had just realized he had willingly handed the executioner the axe. My mother was openly sobbing, her hands covering her face, her pearl necklace trembling violently against her collarbone. The grand, decades-long illusion they had built to protect their favorite daughter had just detonated in their faces, leaving them absolutely penniless and utterly humiliated in front of the entire city. The only person standing in the room with the power and the capital to save them from living on the streets was the exact daughter they had mercilessly discarded. "Get up, Harper!" A sharp, venomous voice cut through the sound of my mother's crying. Madison stepped out from the shadows of the marble pillar. Her teenage face was a mask of pure, unadulterated disgust. She walked right up to her kneeling mother. Harper reached out a trembling hand toward her daughter, desperately seeking a lifeline. Instead, Madison unclasped the heavy, gold-chained designer leather handbag from her shoulder, the exact bag Harper had promised her as a reward for ruining my birthday vest. With a swift, aggressive motion, Madison threw the heavy bag directly into her mother's chest. It hit Harper with a dull thud and clattered onto the marble floor, the golden hardware scratching loudly against the stone. "You are absolutely disgusting," Madison spat, her voice shaking with raw, unfiltered hatred. "You stole my entire college education just to buy yourself cheap thrills. Do not ever speak to me again." Madison turned her back on her weeping mother, her posture perfectly straight, and walked decisively out of the grand ballroom, leaving the heavy gold-plated doors swinging in her wake. Harper let out a guttural, agonizing wail, a sound of total, irreversible defeat. She turned her tear-streaked face back toward me, her hands clasped together in a desperate, begging gesture. "Joanna, please, I am begging you. I will do anything. I will apologize every single day for the rest of my life. Just please do not send me to federal prison. Please do not take my life away." I stared down at her. I felt absolutely nothing. No pity, no triumph, just the cold, sterile satisfaction of a surgeon who had successfully amputated a rotting, gangrenous limb. I signaled to Arthur Vance, my lead attorney, who was standing quietly near the edge of the stage. He stepped forward, unzipping a sleek leather briefcase, and produced a thick stack of legally binding contracts printed on heavy, watermarked paper. He handed me a silver fountain pen. I dropped the heavy stack of documents directly onto the floor in front of Harper's knees. "I do not want your apologies," I stated, my voice completely dead and devoid of any familial warmth. "I want your absolute surrender. These contracts are irrevocable. The first document legally permanently strips you of any and all inheritance rights to our parents' estate, no matter how small it may now be. The second document is an absolute transfer of power. Mom and Dad will sign over full financial and legal conservatorship of their remaining assets directly to me. I will aggressively manage their survival, and you will be permanently barred from ever contacting them or requesting a single dime from my accounts." Harper stared at the thick white paper like it was soaked in poison. "If you sign it right now, in front of all these witnesses, I will drop the criminal identity theft charges against you," I offered, my tone turning sharp and final. "You will still be utterly bankrupt. You will still have absolutely nothing, but you will get to sleep in a cheap motel room instead of a federal penitentiary cell. Greg is already gone. Your daughter is gone. Your parents are completely broken. You have exactly 30 seconds to decide before I tell my lawyers to lock you in a cage." Harper's hands shook violently as she picked up the silver fountain pen. Tears streamed down her ruined makeup, dripping onto the crisp white paper. With a fractured, agonizing sob, she scrawled her signature across the bottom line, permanently signing away her power, her status, and her place in the family. My father, moving like a mechanical shell, stepped forward and silently signed the conservatorship documents, handing the complete control of their ruined lives over to me. The knot was finally, permanently severed. I picked up the signed contracts, handed them back to my attorney, and looked out over the silent, shocked ballroom. The Vanguard Horizon Dynamics Charity Gala would be remembered for decades, not for the money raised, but as the exact night Joanna Lawson burned her toxic family to the ground and built a flawless fortress on their ashes. Exactly 12 months have passed since the night the charity gala became the absolute graveyard of my toxic family. I stepped out onto the expansive glass balcony of my new downtown penthouse. The crisp, cool Denver wind brushed against my skin, but I did not shiver. I was wearing a brand new, custom-tailored white silk vest. It was absolutely flawless, radiant, and completely untouched by a single stain. The heavy dust from the legal explosions had finally settled. The federal investigations concluded with brutal, undeniable efficiency. Gregory and Harper Sterling were completely stripped of every single asset they possessed. They formally declared total bankruptcy and only managed to avoid federal prison by agreeing to a massive financial restitution plan and 5 years of strict probation. They currently live 3 states away, utterly exhausted and broken. My older sister, the arrogant woman who once scoffed at anything less than European designer luxury, now works a grueling minimum-wage manual labor job at a local retail warehouse. She spends her long days sorting cheap inventory to slowly pay back the money her husband stole. My parents were forced to quietly relocate to a very modest, two-bedroom apartment on the far outskirts of the city. As their legally appointed financial conservator, I authorize the precise funds required for their basic rent, groceries, and standard medical care, but I do not give them a single penny more. They leave desperate, tearful voicemails on my phone almost every single week, expressing their profound regret and constantly begging for a chance to make amends and rebuild our relationship. I listen to the messages, ensure their utility bills are paid, and calmly delete the audio files. I strictly fulfill my legal, basic responsibilities to them, but I maintain an impenetrable distance. You cannot rebuild a bridge that was fundamentally built on poison. The only person I actively chose to pull from the wreckage was Madison. I legally sponsored her emancipation and am currently paying for her entire university tuition, along with an intensive, highly specialized psychological therapy program. She is genuinely healing. She is learning how to exist without manipulation, discovering her own independent identity far away from the suffocating, destructive shadows of her mother. We are finally breaking the generational cycle of toxicity. As for my own life, I am no longer just a director. I was recently promoted to an irreplaceable senior partner at Vanguard Horizon Dynamics. I am a powerful, independent woman who firmly holds the reins of her own empire, answering to absolutely no one but myself. I smiled gently, raising a crystal glass of vintage red wine toward the glittering Denver skyline. The deep ruby liquid caught the city lights, beautiful and safely contained inside the glass. I took a slow sip, savoring the absolute, beautiful quiet of my life. I finally realized that the most perfect revenge is not actually about destroying the people who hurt you. True revenge is having the terrifying strength to surgically cut out the toxic tumors from your life, allowing yourself to heal, and rising brilliantly to the absolute peak of your own existence. Thank you so much from the bottom of my heart for taking the time to listen to my story today. I would absolutely love to know where in the world you are listening from. So please drop your city or country in the comments below. If you found today's story inspiring or engaging, I humbly ask that you consider supporting our channel with a donation of just $1. You can easily do this by scanning the QR code currently on your screen or by clicking the direct donation link provided in the description and the pinned comment. Your incredible kindness is the only thing that allows us to pay our dedicated staff, helping them feed their families and ensuring we can continue creating better and more powerful stories for you. Thank you again, and please take care of yourselves.